Welcome to the Hello Judges podcast, sponsored by Tailors of Harrogate. I'm Woodhouse-Banks and I love coffee competitions, both competing in them and talking about them. This episode is also sponsored by Special Guests Coffee. Special Guests is a monthly subscription of top-end specialty coffee curated by two-time UK Barista champion Paul Ross. Check it out at specialguestscoffee.com. So, as you might have guessed, my guest this week is Paul Ross. Paul has competed and been successful across loads of competitions in the UK coffee scene, most recently this year taking second place in Brewers Cup. I really enjoyed catching up with Paul, and I hope it might give you some things to think about if you're thinking about competing yourself. The small pots in front of you are for your used spoons. Please enjoy. Yeah. Well, welcome to the podcast, Paul Ross. Founder of Special Guests Coffee Subscription, UK Barista Champion 2019 and 2021.
I think it might have been 2020. I think it's 19 and 20.
Okay. UK Coffee and Good Spirits Champion 2017.
Yep.
Yeah. Second place in Brewers Cup last year, and International Coffee Coach of Will Pitt.
Yeah.
Excellent. Did I miss any other awesome achievements?
No, I'm quite. That is it. Yeah.
So on that topic, before we started, I had a message from someone. A question for Paul: why are you too lazy to go and win them all? Just do it. Also, maybe hurry up before Aga does it.
Oh dear, I'm trying. If only it was that easy, right?
Yeah. So how did you get started in competitions? Like, why? How did you get started? Why do you do it?
Why did I get started? I trained in specialty with Harrison Hall.
Yeah.
And they had a strong training program and presence in the competitions through union and other people within the business at the time. And when I started, I thought, it appealed to my competitive side, and I got involved. They had an internal competition. We competed in that, and then they sponsored us to go to the nationals.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of UKBC judges have come out of Harrison Hall.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, over the years, a lot of because Harrison Hall and Taylor Street were they were connected in a way, and so through Taylor Street and Harrison Hall, you either see judges or competitors or people in the coffee world that have a link back to one of those two companies. It's quite a small world.
Yeah, absolutely. What coffee are you drinking at home at the moment?
I've got to plug my own, unfortunately or fortunately. It is the Immaculada Natural Geisha from Colombia.
Excellent. I need to buy some. Or can I buy some? I'm not subscribed. Anyway,
well, I've actually got two different coffees. I've got the family reserve, and then I've got the signature series, which is the level above, because they do a tiered system on the farm. So kind of comparing the both of them.
It's exciting. Yeah, we got to cut both of them. We've bought the family reserve.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me know how to buy those two off you, like even just a little bit, so I can do some benchmarking. That'd be awesome.
Amazing,
yeah. So let's get started with some competition questions. If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice before the first time you competed, what would it be?
Good question. I think weirdly, it's not so much what I do. I'd do the same thing again. Is in terms of sort of naivety or ignorance is bliss, is the saying, and I think that's quite a good way of seeing it, because it has all this nuance and complexity and everything else with it, that just doing it, getting involved, is a very key part of that. Once you start the journey, it's a lot easier to continue.
Yeah. Would you say that's along the lines of what advice you'd give to first-time competitors or people who aren't sure about competing?
Yeah, and I think like the I get a few messages every year. I put out sort of a post about competitions, and the key thing to it is finding people that are interested in the same thing. And it's not so much not everyone needs a coach and all these things, but you just need to find someone that's interested in it to do it with you, because it's a lot of work and it's much easier to do together. And so two new competitors working together is much more beneficial and maybe potentially enjoyable way of doing it. I mean, I was fortunate enough to join a company who had multiple competitors, and in that way, you know, you could train together, you could learn more, and generally make it an easier experience.
Right. So we were talking about first-time competitors. Any other reasons you think is a good reason for people to get into competition if they're not sure about it?
If they're not sure about it, then I think then there's only one way you're going to be sure, and that's if you do it or get involved in some way. I don't think that. Yeah, it's the power of doing something, right? And I think that's true of lots of things. Is, you know, you could do a taste the pottery class and figure out, okay, it's not for me, fine.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, you can do in competitions. I mean, majority of my experiences in barista championships, but there's nothing stopping you doing cup tasters or something that requires, you know, less equipment, less expense potentially, and just more accessible in terms of what you need to do. Okay, you know, it's a different skill set potentially, and also there is an element of barrier to entry in terms of cost, but I think it's a excuse the pun, but like a taster session into like what goes into these things, and you know, you also see some of the benefits like the camaraderie and things like that without having to buy 6 napkins or whatever it may be.
Yeah. No, that's good you mentioned that, because one of the next questions I was going to ask was, how much do you think cost is a barrier to entry to these sort of things?
Well, I think it's kind of well documented at this point, and people much more involved than me even have commented on the element of cost. I think to achieve well, especially at the world level, let's talk at the world level firstly, is like to achieve a certain level, to be there, it involves an element of cost. There is always going, if you're trying to be the best in the world at anything, there's an element of cost. And that's just the reality of it. Whether we can as an industry change that and make it more of a level playing field, there is always going to be an element of cost, right? And especially in an event where you all physically need to be in the same space. So someone's going to have to travel, right? So we can't all walk to whatever it is. So I think there's an element to that. I do think that there is businesses and sponsors that are willing to subsidize that cost, because ultimately there is an upside for businesses to be involved. And sponsors, and that's why it happens. So it's about finding, if this is the thing you want to do, finding the people to work with that will support that, and also are aligned in your goals, right? Because there's often a challenge where essentially there's only ever one winner, right? And multiple sponsors want to win. So typically, if I don't know, 100 people enter, there's going to be 99 upset people and one person that's happy, right? And so I think cost is an element completely. And I think,
absolutely.
I think we always talk about cost in the competition world, but the reality is potentially very different to what people think. And I think I refer back to the second place in the Brewers Cup, and I put out a post about how much it cost me. And I think it's very important. I'm not saying that's a lot of money or not a lot of money. Everyone can decide whether that's for themselves. And essentially it boiled down to, I think I spent £500 or £450 on brewing competition this year. And each individual or each company can decide whether that's a lot or not a lot, but that's the reality. And I think we need to talk on terms that are equal, because we say it's expensive, but it's all relative, right? How expensive is it?
Yeah, someone else's expensive might be someone else's inexpensive.
Exactly, right?
So in terms of this, like thinking about all the competitions you've done, are there any particular companies or people, just thinking about opening things up, being accessible, are there any companies or people that have particularly supported you with equipment and other sort of things that you'd like to just sort of make known?
I think it's all relative to the time and place, right?
Yeah.
Each year is very different, and that's especially when the world went into lockdown for 2 years. There's a very much dramatic change in landscape, both in terms of companies and finances. And so, I think that all the people I've worked for in the past have been, I say all the people, majority of the people that I've worked for in the past have supported competitions. And my Worlds last year was supported by Watchhouse. Previously, before that, it was Kiss the Hippo, and then Origin before that. A good way of finding out who is keen in supporting competitions, looking at where past competitors worked, or simply, talking to companies or businesses. Businesses typically outside of those that I've worked with have often sort of either lent me or gifted me things to use. But typically the more expensive items are either lent or borrowed off a friend or something like that. Lewis lent me lots of things for the Brewers Cup, for example. Aurea gave me 3 or 4 brewers to use. So there's certain companies like that, depending on what they have at the time or focused on at the time, are able to help you out.
Yeah, excellent. Shout out to Lewis at Functional Accessories, Horia at Aurea.
Exactly, yeah. There's probably a million I missed out as well over the time, but they're the ones that come to my head right now.
Would you say that the competition scene and competing in competition has changed your life and career?
Yeah, I think it has. Interestingly, I saw a comment the other day that I don't think that we can say that competition is how you should value your career. I think that's probably the worst way of saying it. But at the same time, it offers exposure to a larger audience, and it helps you refine your own skills. So irrelevant of the position, you can find value in that. However, clearly you look at the world barista champions, they have huge exposure and huge opportunities potentially off the back of that. I do think that's changing though, because as more and more champions are crowned, then it becomes harder to differentiate.
Yeah, great. Between you've competed in all the major competitions aside from, I guess, roasting, and have you done cup tasters?
I've done cup tasters. I haven't done roasting. I haven't done latte art.
Yes, latte art, that was the other one. So between like Brewers Cup and Barista, and maybe Sigs as well, like which one do you personally prefer?
Oh, they're all very different. They're very different. I really enjoyed Brewers this year, but it was a very different challenge. I've never done it before. It was learning something new, and that's very different. Coffee and Good Spirits is scored differently. It's obviously to do with alcohol as well, and that's very different. And then Barista Championships is the one I've spent most time on. It's probably like the one I follow the most as well. But I would say probably barista if I was to choose. But to be honest, I think that's maybe changing over time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends what day you ask me.
Do you think any of those competitions in particular make the most difference to pushing the industry forward?
It depends what you mean by pushing the industry forward.
Yeah, I also am unsure.
Yeah, because I think, interestingly, we talk about lots of different ways you could push it forward. If you wanted, wider mass appeal, I think actually latte art is great because it's so visual that it's easy to spectate. It's easy to just generally see the difference. Whereas with barista and brewers, you just don't get to try the coffee.
Yeah.
So, but with that being said, you look at the last 15 years of competitions and how many innovations have come out of that we now use is wild.
Yeah.
We talk about grinders and tools and all kinds of things, techniques, science. I think, interestingly, for me anyway, that competition allows for people to do otherwise uneconomically viable things.
Yes.
So, I mean, for example, coffee I used last year, the mocha, without exposure at the worlds, it's a less marketable coffee, and it's really hard to grow. It's hard to justify to buy. It's really hard to brew and roast. And ultimately, without competition, we might not have got to try that.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of that, it allows us to highlight smaller lots. It allows us to do different things, and ultimately, with the aim to push the industry forward, right?
Yeah, excellent. So I've got a question that was somebody asked, which I thought was quite interesting. So recently, a couple of competitors in different competitions have been they use the term calling foul. So do you think it's damaging to the competition that competitors like Sasa Sestic in the Australian Brewers Cup, he had that incident with a misunderstanding with the judges, and he sort of called them out on Instagram. And Patrick Rolfe saying maybe he didn't win WBC because he didn't take the right kind of coffee, but he knew he wasn't taking the right kind of coffee. Do you think it's sort of damaging to the competitions for people to be speaking out negatively, or do you think that's constructive and beneficial?
I was thinking about this recently, actually. I mean, irrelevant from the individual complaints, right, or whatever you call them, irrelevant of those, because they're situation by situation. I wasn't in Australia or at the World Championships to know what happened, right? That being said, I'm kind of empathetic to both sides. Competitors put in a lot of time, effort, resources to do the best they possibly can, and it's disheartening when you think you've been hard done by. That on the other side is, we need judges. We're asking for feedback, and so we need to be able to have a conversation, both sides of the coin, equally, right? But that being said, everyone is human. So there are going to be mistakes, especially when this competition scene happens in 50 to 60 countries around the world, multiple different languages and cultures. So I'm kind of empathetic to both sides. That being said, I think we look at other sports. I think, and I was running earlier, and I was thinking, it's kind of like, how do you change the game whilst it's still going on? I was thinking, and I was thinking recently. I know we had a conversation. You said you don't watch sports, but WBC is
Yeah,
for you. And I was like, well, in football, for years they've always debated like offside, right? Like what is offside? How do you work it out? And now they've got VAR, and there's still arguments over it, right? So
yeah,
that got introduced years later, and then the first thing that I saw of that of like Hawkeye at Wimbledon. So technology is coming into those sports where traditionally it wouldn't have been. And even in things like the NFL, there's debate over, did he catch it, did he not, all these things, right? There's
yeah,
in every sport there's these debates, and I think, to be honest, it's healthy because competitions get better.
yeah,
Everyone needs to be held to a standard, and we'll do our best, both sides of the coin, to do that, both competitors and judges. There's always going to be mistakes, so how we eradicate though, that's the discussion point.
yeah,
That being said, I think it's always difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, there's only ever one winner who's ultimately the happiest, right?
yeah,
Then there's always going to be negative or some element of negative feedback for the rest of them. Like, you weren't here, you were slightly less, or whatever. And that's the challenge.
yeah. That kind of feedback's hard to take when you've spent thousands of pounds and spent months of your life leading up to something, but it's just the way that these competitions are.
Yeah, and ultimately, we as competitors and judges never try the same cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Like, you have a rough idea what's in that cup, but ultimately you didn't have that coffee.
yeah.
So you can't share that experience necessarily.
Do you have any memorable routines that weren't your own that you particularly enjoyed? Might not be your favorite ever, but is there anything like when you think, oh, what was a memorable good routine? Could be in any competition. Is there any that come to mind?
My favorite routine, it's easy it's easy to say, is Dale's in 2017, I think, from the
Yeah,
Worlds. I think it was very well put together. It was very logical. It was hard to argue with because there was science involved,
yeah,
and that really sort of, turned it up, as it were, in terms of what people were talking about. And he won with an SL28. Yeah, it was phenomenal, right? He took in science, he took in flavor. He used the layouts for the first time in a different way. Yeah, it was a great routine.
yeah. It really was.
Yeah, I find the ones I find more interesting, and it's easier looking back now, are ones that sort of changed the game, right? So the use of the EK,
Yeah,
Maxwell's water routine, didn't necessarily, win the worlds, but everyone talks about it on a different level now. Yeah, those ones are the ones that really mixed it up.
yeah. Excellent. Are you optimistic about anything in the future of competition? Like, how do you feel about where competition's going? Do you think it'll stagnate? Do you think it'll change? Is there anything you're excited about?
I don't think there's a thing particularly I'm excited about in terms of competition, but the overarching thing that is interesting is that we don't know what's coming. I think that's the interesting thing, right?
Yeah,
So the Barista Hustle tool that's just come out, that Anthony Douglas used,
yeah,
that's going to change the game. Or yeah, there's various things that we just don't know. So 2 years ago, asked me, weirdly, like, Eugenoides changed the game, and so I didn't know that was going to come first, second, and third at the World Barista Championships. But when
yeah,
it did, it changed the game. Personally, I'm really excited about frozen coffee. I think that's really interesting. But I've spoken a lot about that. And I'm freezing a lot of coffee. But yeah, it's hard to know what's going to come, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, there's a lot more varietals. I think there's like, over 170 varietals, and we try a handful. Whereas there must be one of the 165 that tastes good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So stepping away from competition now, a random personal question you got asked on Instagram. What's your guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. Really, really bad TV, I think. It's funny, like one of my friends, does a city job, very intelligent, does, and then he comes home and watches maybe the worst TV that you can think of, and he's just like, yeah, you just don't have to think. When you're thinking about, dial-ins or routines or competitions all day or something complicated, and that could be applied to anyone doing any job, the easiest thing to watch is like Bake Off. Like nothing particularly happens. It's funny. It's just yeah. I don't bake necessarily, but yeah, it's just an easy watch. The other thing I think, and this is always sort of my advice for competitors I work with now, is less of a guilty pleasure, but something that helps me, is like have a hobby, or my thing is running. It's like I don't run with headphones, I just run. But other people, go to the gym or walk the dog or whatever it is, right? Just do something else other than just 100% trained, because it's good for the mind.
Yeah, you'll burn out otherwise. It's scary how like similar some of your answers have been to what Matt North gave me when I asked him the same questions. He mentioned TV and Bake Off. Yeah, hilarious. What's next for you, Paul? Like what's going on? What are you excited about in general?
What's next? I think now doing the competitions and having the career in coffee that I've had up to this point has given me a great view on the scene as is at the moment. Obviously, I've not seen it all or done it all, and so at the moment, it's about building the business, having the ability to share the coffees that I want to share, and also I think highlighting the role of the barista more,
Yeah.
in the sense that I think it's a skilled job. I mean, not to get political, but the cost of living and everything else that's going up that we're talking about, and the hospitality crisis of finding good baristas, it shows that actually there is a huge difference between good and not so good baristas, and how do we elevate that position of a skilled barista. And that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment. It's some way of doing that, and the starters of it is sort of competition events where we serve competition style coffee. Can we work that in a better model that shows that this coffee is elevated at every stage? The producer's done a fantastic job, the roaster's done a fantastic job, and then the barista has also done a fantastic job in order to bring that to the table.
That's really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with it, and ideally making it to a couple of events.
Yeah, our first one's in it, like, well, I don't know when this is going to go out. The first one's shortly at the moment, and as I said, we've got 2 tiers of the same coffee that we're going to present, and then after that, there's a few more different things coming up. Maybe something from Mauricio once in a while.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for talking to me, Paul. It's been great.
No worries.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.
What do you find most interesting? Why have you done this podcast?
Well, I was writing, blog posts, sort of dissecting my routine in UK BC, and I was getting loads of, good feedback from people who are just really into competition. And I think in my mind, I've always thought of it as like so extremely niche, but then the people who are into it are really into it. And then it turns out it is actually a bigger, swatch of people that are interested in competition. And I listen to a lot of nerdy coffee podcasts, and there have been a few that touch on competition, but I thought it would be nice to hear it from as many different perspectives as possible. So I thought, if you want something to happen, make it.
Fair enough. And are
Yeah.
you going to compete again?
I'm not competing in Barista Championship this time around.
How come?
It'd be nice to have a year off. Like, coming second was really good. Like, it was my second time in Barista Championships. I was really happy with the result. Really happy to see Claire win. Like, she had worked so hard and absolutely deserved it. And I don't think I've got anything that I want to present or preach at the moment. I think if there's anything I feel really strong about that I want to tell a story of, then I'll get on board with it. But for me, I'm not really a competitive person, but if I've got something I want to say and do, then I'll make that happen.
Yeah, fair enough. And what do you think about the dairy, non-dairy debate that's going on at the moment? Because I know you.
Yeah,
don't
I don't drink milk. And yeah, I would love to see alternative milks introduced into competition. I don't know how that looks, how that works. Again, I talked to Matt North about this as well, and he was saying, like, how do you calibrate judges around the world? What harmonious balance of oat milk and coffee tastes like? What almond milk and coffee tastes like? And hemp milk, and there's a lot of variety to think about, and I'd like to see it happen. Luckily, it's not my job to figure out how it happens, right?
Yeah. I sit on the debate that you kind of start creating another signature drink round.
Yeah.
For better or worse. I mean, I'm not saying that's, I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but it does sway into that, doesn't it? Because, there's other ingredients. It's not just oats in oat milk, for example.
It was interesting at WBC this year. I think it was Patrick Rolfe. He added, was it a yeast or an enzyme to his milk to
lactic enzyme.
Yeah.
And
I found that really interesting, and that I haven't reread the rules in regards to milk, but I was, obviously he made it to the finals. I just thought that was quite surprising.
My only thought on that is it must be a naturally occurring enzyme in milk that he's enhanced. That'd be my gut instinct. But yeah, it is interesting. I don't know how you even change the rules, to be honest.
Yeah.
To account for that.
So in terms of that, with speaking with Matt North, he was like, it's obviously on the agenda, but there's no time because WBC's just finished, and German Barista Championships is next month. So the next season's already about to kick off.
Well, this is one of the challenges, I think, with BC in general, and actually all the competitions, is it's this churning effect of it's always happening.
Yeah.
It's always happening. I talk about in sport, they have 3 months downtime, right? So like typically across most sports have a month or 2 months or 3 months downtime, depending on the sport, where the seasons sort of tick into each other. Whereas BC, there's always a champion. There's always a rotating, okay, we're into the next one. And yeah, for example, I like yourself, I was like, this year I'm not competing. Maybe I will again, maybe I won't, but this year I'm not competing, to take that time out to be like, okay, find that thing I really want to, get my teeth into and work out.
Yeah, definitely. Like, doing it for the sake of doing it just feels a little bit pointless.
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Because when you start that journey, okay, say the UK Championships is in November, December, January time, which it has to be, right? Say it's in January, the heats and then the semis, and then by the finals you need to have something. But the heats and semis, you might not have so much of an idea of what you're going to do, but you need to get them done, and you need to get through, and you need to do a good job in order to then have that opportunity to do a bigger thing later on.
Yeah, definitely.
You might be more passionate about, or you might be able to justify more in the finals than you would be, say, in the heats.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's a bigger project or whatever it may be.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul.
I have one final question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have to go or something.
No, I've got all the time in the world. I'm just cautious about keeping you.
No, it's okay. Did you see the debate this week between a famous coach and some of the judges?
I did see the debate this week. This was actually on my list of questions to ask you. I asked it to Matt North, and I thought, do we really have time to get into that? But if we've got time to get into it, we do.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't have any sort of spicy opinions on it, really. Like, I read Ryan from Watchhouse's comments on the blog that Trent Rollings had posted. I've read all of it, and it's, interesting to see it from both sides. Like competitors spending thousands of pounds, buying amazing coffees, training for months, and receiving a 2, and then judges saying, well, your shots ran for 10 seconds, it tasted like a 2. I'm not gonna put myself out there and say either party is wrong, but I'm definitely intently following it.
Yeah.
It was a very diplomatic answer. I feel like a politician. Do you have any hot takes?
I wouldn't say hot takes per se. I think there's some very good points of both sides. I think we have to consider that, kind of going back to that original point, right? That we are all trying to aim for a certain thing from both sides of the coin, and feedback inherently is typically at the debrief level negative per se. Yeah. Well, especially it's okay. Maybe that's like it's feedback at a stage where emotions are high.
Yeah. And
typically the score sheet says anything less than perfect is your score. Yeah. So they basically encourage, or the score sheet encourages, negative things like why it wasn't perfect, not why your presentation or routine was good or coffee was good, but more like, oh, you said plum, not raisin, which I tasted.
Yeah.
So if you were to rephrase that and be like, okay, it tasted amazingly of raisin, it just wasn't what you said. And I think that flips it. And that is sort of one of the arguments in there. But like the conversation is a bit difficult because it's so nuanced. And I think the arguments against the judges are all sort of bundled into one argument. Whereas, Are we arguing the scale? Are we arguing the quality of judges, or are we arguing the feedback? If we're arguing the scale, okay, then let's look at the scale. 2 is average. By recognition alone, like out of 6, 3 should be average. So what we're actually judging is it against the level of coffee in that competition.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's one of the arguments. The quality of judges, I'm in no position to say that, they're not qualified to judge, because a lot of them are more qualified than I am to taste coffee outside of the competition. And therefore, they've been doing this a long time. And I think, I haven't got any, as you say, spicy takes on that, because, I just can't comment. And then finally, the feedback session is like what we just said. I think it becomes whatever ounce of negative feedback you get, it's always hard to take in a high pressure, high intensity situation. I do agree with the argument that the money element is set aside. No matter how hard you trained or the money you spent, the cup has to be judged as the cup is. Typically, a more expensive coffee typically would score higher. But that's not to say that, I think there's a ceiling on that as well.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the most expensive coffee to win. However, as I said, typically more higher scoring coffees cost more at the green level. So there's not really any spicy take. I just think we have to have empathy both sides and talk on a level playing field, because everyone has a vested interest, which is also another thing to balance off, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
And so I just think it's very difficult. I think which is a really sort of hard answer to give, but it's very difficult both sides to say, to stay constructive and also go full circle, push the industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, people inherently are always going to disagree, and it goes back to that argument that we don't try the same cup of coffee, so we can't debate on a level playing field. That is the challenge. Is a judge says one thing about your coffee that you disagree with, then well, you didn't have the same taste experience, so you don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I competed in the finals, backstage, pulled my shots, was happy with them, went on stage, pulled a practice shot, it ran fine, but then all the shots I pulled during my routine were fast.
Yeah.
And that was represented on the score sheet quite fairly. So
yeah, I think, and to be honest, aside from flavor calls and things like that, generally I would say on balance, most of the feedback I've got is fair. Okay, I might not agree with it all. There's bits, that frustrate me like everyone else, but I don't think that piece of feedback that I disagreed with was the difference between coming third and first.
Yeah,
I think it was probably, okay, you might have got a point there. Okay, fine. Or we can argue whether you cleaned your steam one properly or not, but I just don't think that's the reason you won or lost.
Yeah, for sure.
In some situations that might be the reason you win and lose, but I just don't think that's changed. For me, that's been a massive difference.
Yeah. Great. Was there anything else that we haven't talked about that you kind of had on your mind that you wanted to chat about?
Not particularly. I mean, yeah.
Sweet. I've really enjoyed this, Paul. It's been great. Delving into a few different topics that are current, and I think it'll definitely be interesting for people listening who are into competitions.
Yeah, well, I hope so, and it'd be good to hear it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Hello Judges. It was great to chat with Paul about recent happenings in competition and his perspective on things in general. Next week, my guest is Claire Wallace from Assembly Coffee Roasters. And also, Hello Judges is going to be live at Manchester Coffee Festival. I'll be interviewing 2 times World Coffee and Good Spirits champion Dan Fellows on the music stage on Saturday the 12th at 4 p.m. Come along for the recording and hear what Dan has to say about competition and how it's changed over the years. Make sure you hit subscribe to stay up to date. You can follow us on @TaylorsDiscovery on Instagram, Taylor's Discovery on YouTube, and Hello Judges podcast on Spotify, Apple, and the usual podcast places. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this podcast with you today. Thank you. Time.